It's not really that big, R2. I've only been cut 4 times, and plus, Timothy really likes filing down all the sharp bits.
Exterminate sharpness. Filing, 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 filing.
Okay, maybe you have a point, R2. And I got a really good place where to put this Iron Throne. Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and this is my friend R2. We were just discussing where to place the Iron Throne, and in my personal opinion, I think the best place is in his home, the Red Keep from the Metal Earth Iconx Game of Thrones collection. This build has been giving a lot of builders out there a hard time with all of its close together detail and those towers. Will we see the same thing? That's a great question. Let's get down to the workbench and take a look at the package.
Groove Builders, welcome to the workbench. We have our Metal Earth Iconx Game of Thrones Red Keep. And this build looks really interesting with all of its detail and small pieces. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back, we get a brief look at our metal, followed by some instructions on how to build our model. Then on the right here, we get a quick look at our build, and at the top right here, we have a QR code, which we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. Then just below, we have a difficulty rating here of hard. And then finally, at the very bottom, we get a look at some other models in the series. Groove Builders, let's go ahead and open up our package. Well, that was different. We have our instructions, and we have our metal. And look at all these parts, and that detail. That's insane. All right, Groovers, let's get our first couple of pieces. And just like that, we have all of our parts needed for the first page and first step. Now, normally we would start with part number 1. But for this build, we're going to start with part number 2, and that's because part number 2 is actually inserted into part number 1, and this is our first tower that we're going to be building. Now the trick for these towers is to make sure that we bend every one of those fold lines. Then, once you've done that, you can use a tool to help you get the proper shape. Now in this case here, I'm going to try my smallest one first. Although, actually, you know what? Let's do the second biggest one here. That might be the better one to go with on this one, just to try to get the idea. Now, you don't want to press too hard because these are flat surfaces, but you can get the general shape if you just give a little bit there. That actually worked really well. Now, looking closely at this piece here, there doesn't seem to be any fold lines or anything to kind of make this gold piece get the proper shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our best to get the right shape by using our tweezers. Now how I'm going to go about this first is I'm going to try to get a good triangle there and then work off of the edges. And this should give me a general idea. Maybe I should actually bend the roofs first in the future, and then that way they'll look a little better. All right, there is our first tower complete. Now, one thing I realized that roof is a little bit tricky to form, especially because of how it's formed. So make sure you take your time with this piece. But now that we got it formed, let's attach it to part number 1. Okay, so before attaching these two pieces together, I'm going to go ahead and bend part number 1. And that's just because the roof is attached a certain way. So my most important thing we need to do here is to make sure that all of our seams match the best that we possibly can. That isn't the best connection that I like. but I think it'll get better as time goes on. So let's move on to the next stage, which is forming part number 4. This piece is very interesting. Going right to that fold line, we're going to start this piece by bending it pretty much right in half. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we have attached these two things together here. Okay, now with that attached, we can move on to part number 5 here, which is a little trickier than the last couple pieces that we've formed, but we should be okay. It's just a matter of matching all of our seams. I think that's pretty even, about as even as I can get it. Okay, now let's add our parts together. Is with that roof. That's not a cool way to secure the roof. Alright, we'll have to figure this out in a minute here. Let's continue on to our next step, which involves us bending a whole bunch of those peaks that we did a little bit earlier. We actually have 6 of them to do. Now these guys are just a slightly bit different, because just like this. There we go. All right. That was a little bit challenging, but again, if you use multiple tweezers, it does make your life a little bit easier. Now let's touch us onto our main keep here. Okay, not too shabby. We may have to touch up a few things, but overall, not too bad. Let's add on part number 7 here, which we want to make sure we put all of our tabs along the inside of this piece. Now let's grab part 8 here. There we go, looking really nice. Now we need to form part number 9. Part number 9 is pretty easy to form. We're just going to follow those edges along the bottom, and we're going to slightly bend these guys just a little bit like that. Now we're going to do the next piece here, slightly bending it in, and then matching the seam along the bottom. Okay, there is our first page. We're definitely going to need to clean this model up in the end, but we're looking pretty good so far. Let's get some more parts. And we have all of our parts needed for page 2. Now let's grab part 10 here and 11, because we're going to use part 11 to help me shape part number 10. Let's grab this up here. Okay, there we go. Awesome. Now we can attach this onto our lower floor here. Make sure that border's on the top. Now we're going to grab part 13 here, and just like before, we're going to place it on top. Hopefully I formed that correctly. I should have checked once or twice. That would have been the smart thing to do. Looking really good. Now we can form part 14 here using the border around our part that we just formed. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and shape all of the pieces that we need to. Starting with the top here, just bend that ever so slightly. There we go. And do the same thing here with this piece. Okay, there we go. That's looking pretty nice. Now we can move on to part 15, which is more of this back border area. This can be a little bit tricky, and the real trick to getting these things on is to actually make sure they are as flush as possible to the red keep. So, let's continue on. Cool. Those look good for now, although I think I might have to change them a little bit later. Let's move on to step 3, which is now building some towers. Just like before, we're going to try to roll these the best we can. We know that this roof is super uber tricky. So you know what? Let's try forming it before we actually do our tower. Yeah, these aren't the greatest, but I still nevertheless think that I did really good with that. Now we can move on to the next step, which is attaching part 18 here. Now 19 here is only a partial bend. We're not bending this all the way around, so I'm going to do that. And my tweezers are pretty much perfect for this. Excellent. Look at that. All right. Let's see if we need to bend this more. Probably do. I would imagine we have to. Now these are secured with a twist, but I'm going to use my tab securement tool here and try to do it that way. I think this will be the best way to secure these tabs. I like that a lot. That looks really neat. Okay. Now we can add the bottom guard here. Okay, now these two pieces are kind of tricky to put together. What you have to do is you actually have to push the tabs in, and sometimes the inner tabs here can get in the way. My best suggestion to do these kind of parts is to take these inner tabs after you've twisted them and push them towards the center of the tower. That way, when you're doing the outer tabs here and you're putting them into the insertion holes, you have enough room to be able to get at them and secure them on properly. All right. Now with these two towers done, we got to move on to step number 5 here, which is even more towers. There we go. Got her in there finally. Take some of these guys and bend them back there. But first what we're going to do is, of course, again, secure these tabs with a nice bend. But making sure that we, of course, leave area for our other parts to come in. You know what? Those tabs actually kind of look nice if you bend them and blend them into the detail. Alright, I'm going to do the other one now, but we're going to fast forward that. Okay, there are our 2 towers complete. Now we need more parts. Okay, there we go. We have both of our towers here complete. That was pretty similar to our other towers here and how everything comes together. Let's continue on with step number 7 here, which has us building with part 32. Now before I bend this, I'm actually going to go ahead and form part 33, which has that really tiny roof, which can be really tricky to fold. If you look closely at this part, you can kind of see small triangles in the gold. That's where you want to bend. Unfortunately, there's nothing on the back to show you those triangles, so you really have to go by the gold on the front. The smaller the triangles, the harder they are to bend. Okay, there's our tower. I'm going to have to come back to this one a little bit later and do some touch-ups, but let's move on to step 18 now. Press these 2 parts together. There we go. And then we're just going to fold these tabs over and make them flush. You should have a pretty good rectangle here if everything looks right, and if you don't, you just press on the sides. If you have some bigger tools, like say some pliers, those might be a little better to use than these tweezers right here. It's a nice shape though. Alright, now we need a little bit more of that outside area. And just like our other 2 towers, we're going to disguise these 2 tabs as part of the detail up here and see how that looks. In the end, if we need to, we can come back and retighten these up. Okay, 1 tower done. Let's do the next one. And there we go. We have our 2 towers complete, but now we're going to need more parts. And now we've cut out all the parts needed for page 5. The first step we have in step 11 is connecting all the pieces that we've made previously onto our red keep. Now it's very important to double check all of your parts and make sure that when you're placing them into the red keep that you're placing them into the right spot and that you're not forcing them in too hard. You don't want to scratch any of the detail here, especially along part number 2. Alright Groove Builders, let's get started with step 3 and move on from there. Looking sharp, looking sharp. And now that we have all of our towers put on, we're going to have to go and place that plate on the back, which is part 45. Now, one thing I'm realizing is as I'm working on this detail, I'm accidentally hitting different parts, and some things are kind of knocking out of alignment. I was really worried about these 2 towers right here, but as we added parts, everything started to stay where it was, which I'm pretty happy about. Anyway, let's continue on by adding part 45 onto our back. Excellent, looking really nice. And now we need to move on to forming a whole bunch of towers. These are pretty repetitive, so I'm going to do one and then fast forward through the other ones. And there we go. We have step 12 all complete. Now, the other towers here are all formed very similarly, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward till I'm completely done them. Alright, and there's our fast forward, and I've also taken the opportunity to organize all of our tower pieces here, as all of our steps 12 through 17 involve you forming some kind of tower. All of them are constructed exactly the same, like I said before, but they do have different widths for different parts of the castle. Okay, so now that I've finished up with the last one there, step 17, we can go ahead and attach them all on. This might take some time, but if we go ahead and pre-bend some of our tabs, it will make it a lot easier for us. And there we go. We have all of our towers placed onto the red keep. At least the first couple of steps of red towers. These guys are very interesting to place on and a little bit more difficult than I thought, but they look pretty good. Let's continue on to our next page, and we're going to need more parts. And there we go, all of our parts needed for page 6. Let's get started with part number 53 here. I'm just going to get the basic shape here, and then I'm going to use part 54 to help me actually get the proper shape. Next, we have our tower here, bent very similar to the ones we've done before. Our tower looks pretty good there, and we're getting really good at forming these rooftops. Now, let's attach everything together. With part 61 here, we're just going to match up all of our seams. I see a few little extra pieces of metal here I need to cut off. Okay, there we go. All right, there's step 19. Place this down to the side here. We need to start working on step 20, which is just another tower. Okay, and there is step 20. Very nice. I'm going to put this down here and now grab the massive part 66 and begin forming this. Be very careful though not to get any hot spots. I'm going to use my tweezers here to give me a quick little hand. I'm really going to have to tidy up this part here afterwards. I'm mixing it up with my hands. But let's keep powering on with part 69. Our little tower there, all complete. Now we can attach it onto that big piece we were forming earlier. This might be a tad tricky. We need to form these down here. Okay, that looks really nice. Now, with all of this complete, we need to get more parts. And just like that, we have all of our parts needed for page 7. And it looks like we're doing more towers, so we're going to go ahead and fast forward through most of this. And if there's anything I see that might stand out, I'll stop and explain a little bit about what I'm doing. Okay, that tower was a little trickier than I was expecting, but we did okay. Let's continue on with our next step, step 23 here, which has us doing about the same thing again. Okay, there's our second tower. I'm definitely going to have to do some more straightening when everything comes together, but our 2 towers are complete. Put those down, and now we can move on to the next step, which is attaching these towers onto that main part. Cool. Those towers are a pain in the butt to put in, but we got her in. Best way to start is do it on one side and then slowly push them in on the other, just being careful not to accidentally misshape any of that detail. Okay, now with that added on, we need to put even more detail on here with 81. 81 looks like this right here. Now the important part with this piece here is just to make sure that all of your seams match up really nicely. Now for this detail here, I'm going to start with the far side tabs, and then once I get those in, I think I got her in right now. There we go. I'm going to put the far tab in. There we go. That tower is complete. But a little bit of a mission, especially adding all the things on here. I actually found that easier than building these towers and putting them on separately. Anyway, now that we have that done, I'm assuming we have to do this side here, but that's going to require more parts. And there we have it, all of our parts needed to be able to build the Red Keep, and all the parts needed for page 8. Groovers, let's get started with our first piece here, part 85, which is just more towers. There we go. That's that tower on. Now we need to do the other side here. Okay, that is our last tower, and unfortunately, I had a little bit of an incident. Looks like we're gonna need some super glue to fix that little back area up, so be very careful when handling this piece. Now let's attach everything together and finish up our Red Keep. That tower goes over top, and then we're gonna feed in that side first, and then this side right here. And there we go, the Red Keep.
We did it, Groove Builders. We built the Red Keep from the Metal Earth Iconx Game of Thrones collection. And this build was definitely difficult. If you're looking to build it at home, there are a few things you're going to want to know before you attempt it. Let's talk about those things in construction. My first point when it comes to building the Red Keep is that it's very important to make sure you have the proper tools on hand before you start building any of these pieces. There is a lot of unique shapings and small bits of detail that you're going to be handling with this build, so having some mandrels and detail tweezers will definitely make it a lot easier for you. If you're interested in some of the tools that I have, make sure you check out my tool video that I'll leave a link to down below. For my second point, I recommend double checking your pieces and pre-bending some of your tabs before placing everything together. Now with this particular build, it really does require us to have some pretty accurate detailing. And when you're putting your pieces together, you might find that they might not go together that well. If that's the case, take your piece off again and try reshaping it just a little bit. You might find that it fits together a little bit better the second time around. Taking your time like this will really make for a nice model, and pre-bending those tabs on one side will really help you with putting everything together. For my third and final point, I want to talk about all of this small detail that we have here along the tower. It really does look nice, but you have to be careful not to accidentally break it when attaching some of the other bits of detail on. Like this back tower here, I accidentally broke it myself while attaching some of the other pieces on. And while Metal Earth is always more than willing to replace any parts that you break, you can always add just a little bit of super glue to it and that will fix it up nice too. You can't even tell that I broke that back tower. And with that being said, Groove Builders, let's move on to build time. The Metal Earth Iconx Red Keep took me just over 7 hours to build, and I really think I should have taken some more time to make sure that these towers are absolutely perfect. You can't rush this build, and even having the right tools, you might feel yourself being pressured to rush some of the repeat detail. Don't do it. Take your time with this build. You'll thank yourself in the end with what you have. And finally, Groove Builders, my thoughts. The Metal Earth Iconx Game of Thrones Red Keep is a build that's going to have you testing your skills and patience with metal pieces. It has towers that you have to keep straight, and some detail pieces that are very hard to get together. Not to mention some detail that you have to be careful not to break a little bit later, like I did over here. I can recommend this build for any fan of the series that's built some other metal models in the past. That bit of experience will come in handy with some of the trickier bits of detail. And that's why I really can't recommend this for new builders. I'm sure that you could struggle through it, but in the end, I think that the amount of detail that's here is really just too complex for somebody out there who's new to the metal model hobby. I really do like how this Red Keep came out. And with our growing collection of Game of Thrones models, I think this one will always stand out in our collection. And with that, Groove Builders, we're at the end of our show. I had a really good time building the Red Keep with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, Groove Builders, keep building. Now, I gotta find a room in the TARDIS big enough to blow this up to size. Oh boy.